sooner or later in the discussion, it's going to come down to the truth test. The truth test in Mormonism is what it says right here. You study things out, you pray, you look for that feeling, that deep down feeling. Sometimes it's a tingling in your spine, sometimes it's a warmness in your heart that you feel things are true. Okay? I have a friend here in Mesa, his name's Grant. He's kind of made a personal hobby of asking other religions around the world about how they felt like they were called, how they felt like they knew things were true in religion. And a lot of them came up with a lot of very similar steps to what Mormonism uses for a truth test. The truth test is given in the Book of Mormon. One of the last chapters in Moroni talks about the truth test. And so that's where Mormonism, they placed all their faith in the truth test. The truth test is the end-all way to determine truth. It's not professors in universities. It's not scientific methods. It is praying and feeling the Spirit. That's how you determine truth. That's the only way to determine truth. And at some point in the discussion, they're going to start bearing testimony to you. They're going to start saying, I know it's true. It has to be true. Well, at that point, you're going to have to start talking about the truth test and articulate to them that the truth test is unreliable. There are too many false positives. You've got millions of people in different religions using the same truth test, coming up with different answers. How can it be reliable? It's not. It can't be. It's got to be an emotional response. It's the only way you can consider such a response. And the last one part here, it has a dubious track record. This kind of emotional truth test. This is what the Third Reich used, okay, to convince 39 million people or 79 million people in Germany, to turn against the world and try and conquer them. That they were the elite race, that everybody else should be destroyed. This is the basic premise of the Third Reich. Don't trust your intellect. Don't think about it. Just go with your emotion. Your emotion says that you're the superior race. Trust your emotion. Okay? Kill everybody else on earth. So, I'll let you read those quotes yourself. Okay, throughout the presentation, I'm going to be touching on our biases as human beings. Because as human beings, we have some handicaps and some things about our makeup as human beings that sometimes prevent us from being objective in our thinking. Okay. And here are some of them. The groupthink bias. A lot of scientists think this is because of our heredity, of our development, our evolution, that we tend to think like the group because people who think like the group tended to have the support of the group, tended to be able to reproduce and become stronger. So the groupthink and going along with the group is something that we tend to do innately. Okay? And we're critical of other groups, but not our own group. We're born here in America. We tend to think like Americans. We're very critical of other countries, but oftentimes we're blind to some of the things that are wrong here at home. There are plenty of things wrong here at home. We tend to maybe gloss over them more than we should. The authority bias, self-explanatory. We defer to experts. And that's not necessarily a bad bias, but it's a bias we have. Authorities, we'll talk about this later, and experts, really smart people, don't necessarily have the truth. Okay? The same is believing bias. In Mormonism, once a month, there's a meeting dedicated to saying is believing. They call it fast and testimony meeting. Okay? Once a month they go, and their members are encouraged to stand up and say they know the church is true, they know Joseph Smith was a prophet, they know the Book of Mormon is true. And they'll even come right out and say, the more you say it, the more you believe it. It's true, isn't it? Jehovah's Witnesses have the same thing. The more you preach it, the more you say it, the more you pronounce it, the more you believe it. This is a human bias. Okay? The more we say something, doesn't matter how false it is. The more we say it, the more we're going to believe it. And I call this declarationism or testimony bearing. It's the last bastion of the fanatic. When he has nothing else he can say, he'll begin by saying, I know it's true. I know it, I know it, I know it. America must die. The radical Islam, Al-Qaeda will say that. America must die, I know it in my heart, and it must happen. And there's no logical basis for what they're saying. Well, when you meet with your Mormon friends to discuss the Book of Mormon, they're going to have exactly the same thing. They're going to resort to testimony bearing and declarationism. Okay, the confirmation bias. This is a bias that the first thing you hear, the first thing you understand is usually the one that will remain. Okay, unless it's pushed aside by something very, very strong. We tend to use I can see these facts coming along, and I see something that matches what I already thought. You say, oh, that makes sense. And you stop. It's called a makes sense, stop type of thinking. It's not critical thinking, but it's a bias we have as humans. The ironic thing about this bias is that more highly intelligent persons tend to become heroes along these lines because they can dream up very, very intricate and convoluted logical paths to explain something that's very irrational. Okay, so I have one friend in particular who's a genius IQ, and I asked him some of these questions about the Book of Mormon you have in your hands, and he said, well, you know, there's some really neat explanations for those things, and here's one of them, and he becomes a hero because he can draw these very, very tortuous arguments and make these tortuous arguments that make really no sense when you think about them objectively. But he's able to string together the logical web to explain them away. And so sometimes the most highly intelligent people become the heroes. Well, this is good news for you and me because if you're like me, average intelligence, you can still think objectively. You can still get beyond your bias if you try. Escalation of commitment. This is also called the sacrifice trap. The more time you spend, the more money you spend in a particular endeavor, the more you're going to not find fault with it. Okay. Take, for example, I was doing my master's program. By the time I completed a couple of very difficult courses in my master's degree program, there's no way I'm going to give up on it. Okay. I've invested too much time. I've invested too much effort. I've invested too much money. Mormonism, they start very early. The members, you're encouraged to pay tithing when you're 8 years old. Okay, 10% of anything you earn from mom and dad or from mowing the neighbor's lawn, you pay 10% of the church. By the time you're 16, you've given quite a bit of your money. You've given lots and lots of your time because you're asked to do these projects together. You have personal progress reports. You meet with your young men and young women leaders. You spend hours and hours and hours. You study the scriptures. You read the Book of Mormon over and over and over again. You spend so much time. You give so much money. Even by the age of 16 or 18, before you're really able to think objectively, you've already fallen into the escalation of commitment trap. Okay? Mind control organizations use that extensively. The dominant thought. Okay? Whatever you think foremost in your mind, that's what you tend to see in the rest of the world. Your life experience tends to confirm what you think about the most. Okay, so those are the biases. We'll be talking about how cults now and mind control organizations prey upon those biases to keep us in their clutches. Okay? Now, whether or not the mind control organization or the cult is intentionally designed to keep us in their clutches and use those biases doesn't matter. It could just be a natural selection. It just so happens that the cults that are the best at doing these things, they are the ones that survive. They're the ones that become the most powerful and the most prevalent.